What's up, everyone? It is Thursday, June 28th. This is Raphael Garcia and Schwan back for episode 89 of the MMA Ratings podcast. So, first and foremost, thank you, Schwan, for joining me tonight.
No, thank you for having me. Pleasure always. Pleasure
Um,
as always.
the late night version, we usually bring the show to you probably about 3 hours earlier on Thursdays, but hey, people got things to do, but we're bringing you a show anyway. As always, thank you for listening to our content. Please be sure to like and share our episode across social media. You can find us at mmaratings.net. You can find us on Instagram and what's the other one? Instagram and Twitter at MMA Ratings. Schwan, why don't you let them know where we can find the show?
We got SoundCloud, YouTube, and iTunes are the three biggest outlets to find the show at.
So we have quite a bit to talk about today. I do not have an agenda. It's been a long ass week. So we're just going to try to fucking wing it and we're going to do a damn good job at it. First thing I wanted to talk about was the retirements that we've seen this week. We've seen three guys retired, two former champions, one champion, a title contender, Rashad Evans, Josh Koscheck, and Johnny Hendricks. All three announced their retirement this week. All three of them were going through some career skids. I want to say Koscheck's is probably the worst because I think the last person he defeated was Matt Hughes. So guys, they've been struggling. They've had their issues, which each and every one of them in their own separate ways. So let's talk about each and every one. First one up, former light heavyweight champion Rashad Evans. And Schwan, why don't you go ahead and start? What are your thoughts about him, his retirement, and his legacy in the sport?
I think Rashad is actually you could say he's a legitimate legend. He is a tough winner, winning it at the heavyweight division, then going in to win a light heavyweight title. You know, he's had some really big wins. And his biggest contribution, I think, isn't just as a fighter, it's as a personality. He's one of the few fighters who really got interacting with the fans, having a character, trying to make that bridge from fighter to analyst as well. I think he was one of the first guys to actually do that and do it well, in my opinion. My biggest issue with him as a fighter was I never quite felt he was as technical as he should have been. He had a lot of technical knowledge. He understood how the rules work. He understood what you needed to do. But his execution of these skills in the fight game, to me, were inconsistent at best. I think he was best when he was working with Trevor Whitman. Trevor Whitman had his boxing really cleaned up, had that boxing wrestling balance really cleaned up when he was working with him for a while. But a lot of Rashad's issues started happening when he lost a step physically. His biggest asset was his athleticism. And once that started going, all the holes in his game started becoming very apparent. And he just started going on a downhill slide. When he was in his physical prime, even after the loss of Machida, very few guys could handle him. He had some injuries. He had some time away. He lost some of that explosiveness. And all of a sudden you started seeing limitations in his wrestling, limitations in his striking, limitations in his defense. And he wasn't even competitive. He was just getting blown out by every guy he got in the cage with, which lets you know that a lot of his success was based off that athleticism and just his toughness. And once those two things started to deteriorate, he was no longer world-class, much less mid-tier as a fighter. And that's kind of a shame. But it is very impressive how far he got, considering some of the limitations he had technically. But I think he's a legend. I think his biggest contributions will be moving forward as a contributor to the sport.
So he's very interesting to me because when I think about Rashad Evans, there's one particular conversation I remember having about him. I was a fan of him when he was on the show very early in his career. I thought he was pretty awesome. I remember his head kick knockout of Sean Salmon, which was crazy and ridiculous. But there's one conversation I remember having about Rashad Evans that kind of threw me in my support behind him early. And that was when he fought Chuck Liddell. And what occurred was I was at work. This is back when I was working at ESPN. and the fight was starting. We were around monitors. We were getting ready for the fight, and I remember turning to one of my coworkers at the time, and it was how they do the backstage shot of the fighter walking into the arena for the first time, where Rashad was walking into the arena in a suit. He was one of the first fighters to show up in a suit, like he was professional going to work. And I looked at one of my coworkers, and they were like, "I don't like this guy." And I was like, "Why is that?" Like, I don't know, something about him just rubs me the wrong way. Now, if you are a white male and you say that about an athlete who has done nothing wrong ever in the history of ever, be aware that you're using coded language. Basically, what he was saying is he didn't like Rashad because he was black, in my opinion. He kept calling him cocky, arrogant, using all of the buzzwords that didn't need to be used to describe his so-called animosity towards Rashad Evans. And he was telling me that he hoped Chuck Liddell knocked him out. Well, how did that work out? We remember him. We remember Evans stretching Liddell in a way that he never had been stretched, and probably never been stretched since. Like, he stretched that man in that fight, and that right there got me. I jumped up, ran over to his desk, my coworker's desk at the time, screamed and yelled in his face. He probably never spoke to me again after that. I don't even remember, but that's probably the biggest Rashad Evans moment that I remember, sit back and remember, and it's always made me a fan of his. Win or lose, which is why it made it so difficult for me to watch him continue fighting and continue struggling through his last few fights, because like, he looked like an individual where mentally he was there. He knew what his body needed to be doing to get the fight to where he wanted to get the fight. He knew that he was mentally there, but his body just wasn't reacting anymore. And he wasn't able to get the work done on a regular basis. And that's why it's upsetting to see him finally step away from the sport, but I understand it's for the best.
Yeah, his image never really recovered from the whole Matt Hughes incident on Tough. I think Matt Hughes labeled him with the cocky, or maybe it was Dana White, combination of those two, and he never really got away from it. I won't always say it's a matter of racial issues, but as you said before, there's certain fans who accept certain things from one type of fighter. When another fighter does something different, then it's considered disrespectful. Chuck would go around screaming around the cage after he knocked somebody out, and that's funny, that's acceptable, that's him letting out his warrior spirit. Rashad would maybe showboat in the middle of a fight or do a dance after the fight, and all of a sudden that's cocky and it's disrespectful. When really they're just two different sides of the same coin. So I think his image to a certain degree never recovered from how Matt Hughes portrayed him, even though from all accounts from fighters, and I know fighters who know him, he's a stand-up guy. He's good to his teammates. He was a good coach. He's a good analyst. He's good to the people he works with as an analyst. He's really, from what I understand, a class act. But I think what Matt Hughes said early on really shaped the image and how he was taken moving forward as an athlete. And he's never really shaken it. He's never really gotten past that point.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you on that. I feel like he never really got past that, even though he tried. And it's interesting because he was kind of cast as the bad guy in the whole John Jones situation too. But looking back from a historical standpoint, how has that kind of played out? He was
everything that John was true. He's stealing my style. He's kind of fake. Y'all don't know the real John. And while John Jones proved to be a superior fighter, I can't say one thing that Rashad Evans has said about John Jones that has been true. And even if you want to take one step further, he never disrespected Jackson Wink about how they went about their business. But in one interview, I remember he mentioned that they like to do a lot of creative things and creative approaches, and some of those things just don't work for certain fighters. And as Jackson Wink has had a bit of a losing streak in the past couple of years, you see some of the more esoteric strategies they come up with are really based on them having better talent. It's not so much as the better strategy or better technique, it's that better athletes executing. And when that talent started to level off, we started seeing a leveling off in their dominance in mixed martial arts. So a lot of things that Rashad Evans has said as an analyst or speaking, breaking down people's games, has been really intelligent, really beneficial. But because of the image he has, people tend not to listen to him. But if you look back in hindsight, a lot of the stuff he said, whether it's about Rampage, Jackson Wink, John Jones, or just fighting in general, has been turned out to be all true.
That's the weird thing about it. Like, a lot of the stuff, I remember he was one of the first ones to call John Jones like a snake, call him like a like Two-Face and all that. But looking back, it's like, well, maybe he wasn't 100% wrong. And I definitely think that that's going to be an intriguing conversation. I think he has a lot to offer the sport from the booth. I definitely think he has a lot to offer in that space in the future. I think he's going to do great work as a commentator. But yeah, I am sad to see his career come to an end. But at the same time, I am not mad that it's coming to an end because I think
There's
that
one more thing. As a fighter, and I've talked to a lot of boxing coaches about this who saw him fight, and I don't want to see. I know I questioned some of his technical execution, some of the holes in his game, the distance management. That's why he always countered instead of leading because he wasn't really good at gauging distance or working his way into distance. So he let you throw something out and counter you. But in pointing out these technical shortcomings, I'm also highlighting the fact that he had a very good natural feel and a mind for the intangible aspects of fighting, as far as timing. Like a big thing with a lot of boxing guys who watch a fight, they're like, he's one of the few MMA guys who actually knew how to have a feel out round. Like 9 times out of 10, you see two guys fight, they kind of feel it out for a couple seconds, and they go all out. Rashad Evans would always be looking for openings, testing your reaction, seeing what you're going to do, and then later in that round, if not later in that fight, he would start to exploit it. He did it against Forrest Griffin. He did it against Chuck Liddell. He's done it time and time again. So he was a very smart fighter, a guy who understood the ebb and flows of fights and understood the intangible aspects of fights that determine winning, not just actual kick, punch, or technique or strategy, but the little adjustments and the little flows you feel within the context of a fight. And he's one of the few guys who started the trend of feeling a guy out, setting him up, making reads on the fly. So while he wasn't a very technical fighter, as far as being cerebral and intelligent and aware of patterns and reads and tendencies, he was beyond world class and one of the first fighters to really pay attention to that.
So let's segue off of him there, and let's move into the next name where we have Johnny Hendricks. Johnny Hendricks walked away from the sport after he was the welterweight champion. And in many ways, a lot of people feel like he defeated GSP, who many consider in the conversation for one of the greatest of all time. He slept John Fitch, slept Martin Kettman, had a great fight with Robbie Lawler, defeated him. So, and I mean, some people feel like he lost that fight. But looking back at Hendricks' career, what are your thoughts about him, and what are some of the ideas that come to mind?
Well, first of all, he was like a shooting star. I mean, I think he had 2 fights before he got in the UFC. So in his third fight, he's fighting UFC competition, and essentially, I think except for one loss before he went on that huge run, he
He
was
lost to Rich Story
unstoppable.
of all people.
Yeah, but other than that, he was like, and he was supposed to be a wrestler, and he was just knocking people out, and he got his way. He's the first person to make GSP look human in almost the entirety of his career, except for BJ Penn. And then he goes out and he has the two back-to-back fights with Lawler that are fights of the years. And then it's like just as soon as he established himself, where he was one of the elite welterweights of the world and the champion, it like all disappeared, and he could just never get that magic back. Like I don't know if it was the last. I don't know him personally. We know his trainer, Stephen Wright, wonderful world class trainer, wonderful human being. But it just seems like he could never get back on track once he started losing. It's like you went from being the most dominant welterweight in the world to ending your career as a mid-tier middleweight. And it's like I don't have any explanation for how that happened. Technically, he didn't fall off. A lot of it just seemed to be attributed to his lack of, I guess, his lack of discipline and weight cutting. I don't know what it was, but I've never seen a guy streak so high. It seems so effective and technically sound and strategically sound, and to go the complete opposite way in such a brief period of time. It was just amazing to watch.
Yeah,
Like usually there's a
you're breaking up a little bit there, so I want to
Okay.
hop in, and I want to hop in there because it's interesting what you said, because I was listening to, I think Luke Thomas tweeted out about what he thought of his career, and he brought it up. He didn't make any accusations. That he won, like, a couple things comes to mind when talking about Hendrick's career. He was like, "What about looking at him in a post USADA way?" And I looked at that and I was like, "That's a tough one," but I get the point that he's making. I mean, you do have to kind of say, what, like, did the implementation of USADA impact his career, and if so, how much did it impact it? Because you look back at it, and that's really when he did fall off. It's when he started having issues with the weight cutting, when he started looking a lot more human. And granted, yes, he never failed a test. He never had any accusations or anything like that around him. But a lot of people do point to that, and it is something that I think is worth having a conversation in retrospect, knowing what we know about the sport today. It is something that I think is interesting, and you wonder what really occurred during that time.
Yeah, you're right. You have to ask the question because his performance fell off so badly. I mean, he went from always making weight to not being able to make a weight. He went from knocking guys out with 1 or 2 hunches to going 5 rounds and getting knocked out himself. It was just amazing how much his performance and his athleticism and his power declined. Once again, it's hard for me to say that because he never failed a test,
Never
and
failed a test.
like people bash Anderson Silva and they're like, well, Anderson says, well, I wasn't cheating before, but the fact that you got caught cheating, so now we can throw aspersions at you. Hendrick never got caught. So it's hard for me to really, even though the performance lines up, he never got caught. And so many guys that got caught who we won't give the benefit of the doubt. So how are you still not going to give the benefit of the doubt to somebody who was never caught?
Mm-hmm. Definitely there. And I think it's all an interesting conversation that's worth bringing up. When you look back at Hendricks, what do you think his career would have been like if he would have moved up a weight class sooner?
I don't think he was ever big enough for the middleweight division. I said this before. I even talked to his trainer about that when he had that win against Hector Lombard. Originally, I was saying that he should fight Dan Kelly next. Dan Kelly was a winnable fight, and they wanted Dan Kelly, but they ended up getting Tim Bosch, I think, and that would have changed things a lot because then he would have had. I believe he would have had two wins in a row at middleweight, and with 2 wins in a row at middleweight, that changes the whole storyline on where he's going. The biggest thing for him is that middleweight he had a quickness and an athleticism advantage, but he wasn't big enough. His power didn't translate to middleweight. He could knock out pretty solid welterweights, but against middleweights, his power wasn't going to, in my opinion, didn't transfer, which means he would have to make adjustments to his style. Because when you can knock guys out, you fight differently. You only throw a certain amount of punches because you knock guys out or beat them up. When you're at a higher weight class, you got to throw more punches. You got to be more defensively sound. You can't just dominate with wrestling because you got guys coming in 25, 30 pounds heavier than you. So even if they're not as good a wrestler, they can get back up. They can take you down. I don't think his style had enough time to be modified for him to be effective. Now, if he planned to move middleweight, he could make adjustments in his style, add things, take things out of his game. But I don't know that he ever would have been world class in middleweight. I think he could have been good, maybe even very good. But that size difference, 25, 35 pounds in some cases, that's too much. And he was the big welterweight, but he was not a very big middleweight. And I think he would have had a similar track record to what he had when he moved up at the later stages of his career. I just don't think it was a good way for him. I think he was made to be a welterweight. And now if in a Bellator, maybe he can compete because there's a lower level of middleweight. But at the UFC level, there's just too many guys with good enough wrestling backgrounds and top-end athleticism and power. I mean, Johnny Hendricks against Yoel Romero at any point in Yoel Romero's UFC run, what would Yoel Romero have done to Johnny Hendricks?
Oh, man, that would have ended very badly.
Even 2 years ago, Johnny Hendricks versus Robert Whitaker. We're talking about assault and battery. We're talking about some. We're talking about criminal charges being placed on these guys. At
that point in time, we're talking about bona fide violence. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, so I don't think it ever was a good move for him. The best thing he could have done is stayed at welterweight as long as possible, and then if he had to move to middleweight, make a move. But that would required an adjustment in his style and his approach for him to be even effective at a middling level.
Definitely true there. So, last person that brings us to is the one and only Josh Koscheck. And I'm not going to lie, dude. This is pretty hard. This one, I'm not going to say this is pretty hard for me, but this is hard for me because Josh Koscheck has always been my dude. I don't know why. Maybe it was the jerk aspect in me, but Koscheck has always been one of my favorite fighters. Ever since his time on Tough and the way he portrayed himself trying to get into get on everyone's nerves. Everyone points to Chael Sonnen as the first guy to really be the heel in MMA. Man, you got to look at Josh Koscheck and say, hey, some of the stuff he was doing predates Chael Sonnen. and he did it, and he did it well. And I almost feel like people kind of overlook it because, in some regard, it's like maybe that's just really who he was as a person. And since he was a jerk, everyone knows that he wasn't joking. They just kind of overlooked it. But we're not talking about his personality. We're talking about what he did in the cage. And I always look back at him and I wondered how great he could have been if he would have just gotten some key wins. I remember when he took that fight against Thiago Alves on a couple weeks' notice. I was like, that's a bad fight, but he still took it anyway. I remember when he was the first guy to take a round off of off of GSP in years. So he had that to his name as well. And you just got to wonder, like, how much really, like, how much was this guy set to be, like, how much successful could he have been over the years?
I feel bad for him because the other two guys in this list at one time were the best in their division, possibly top 5 pound for pound at some point. People thought that. And Josh Koscheck never was able to reach that level. He just wasn't able to. And much like Rashad, a lot of his success wasn't even his wrestling. It was his athleticism. At the time he came in, he was probably one of the top 2% athletes in the sport as far as the U.S. Guys couldn't deal with his athleticism. And the sad thing is, much like Rashad, he leaned a lot on that athleticism. He never really developed a real comprehensive striking game. He got a little bit better, a little bit sharper, had a jab that came up here and disappeared. He had an atomic bomb for a right hand, but where was the left hook? Where was the footwork? Where were the feints? Where were the counters? He never developed that stuff. He just kind of exploded and ran through guys or took guys down and roughed them up with some power. He was never really a refined, improving mixed martial artist. And unlike Rashad, he didn't have that feel for the game. He didn't know how to feel out a round. He didn't know how to read distances and bait people in and time counters and find the right shot to throw. He didn't have that. All he had was natural athleticism. And I don't know if it's the problem with him, he was too stubborn, or AKA let him down by not developing his technical skills, but he never developed in a manner that allowed him to maximize his athleticism. His athleticism was a crutch. It wasn't a tool to enhance his skills. His biggest contribution as a fighter was he understood the game and he played the game and he maximized his earning by being a heel. That's what he brought to mixed martial arts. He was the first guy to embrace being a heel. If everybody else wanted to be liked and be popular, he didn't care. He wanted to get paid. He wanted to get the big fights. He wanted the high-profile fights. He wanted the high-profile checks, and he did whatever it took to get those. But he was never like he was an elite talent, but he never had elite skills. And once again, as he started to slow down, and other better and comparable athletes started getting MMA, that's when he started getting exposed. If you look at it, all the fights he won and dominated were against lesser athletes. When he started facing comparable athletes with decent skill sets, he started getting lit up. He started getting handled. I mean, GSP beat him, but GSP wasn't the wrestler he was, but GSP was a better all-round fighter, and he had comparable athleticism. Once you took that athletic advantage away, he just wasn't much of a threat. And that's not being harsh. That's being fair. If you watch his fights, there's very little technical progression. He never learned how to really grapple. He never learned how to kickbox. He never really learned how to box.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to agree with you on that there. So I didn't want to stay on those guys all night, but that's definitely some interesting retirements we've had in the sport.
You know, the running joke now is it's going to be a sad thing when you see them all in the Bellator middleweight tournament for $1 million.
No, better not. Speaking of Bellator, let's go ahead and kind of segue into that there, because Bellator has had a pretty interesting week. First, Lyoto Machida goes over to Bellator. Let's start there. The Dragon is riding a 2-fight win streak in the UFC. A pretty interesting win over Eric Anders, and then the front kick knockout of Vitor Belfort. They're getting a guy who was the light heavyweight champion. He's actually the man who defeated Rashad Evans and started his downward slope. And now you have him moving over to Bellator. And I wrote about this earlier this week, that he's talking about fighting the likes of Fedor and Gegard Mousasi and Rory McDonald. Those are all intriguing fights, but what do you think about his move over to the Bellator in any shape or form?
I mean, at this stage of his career, it's a good move because Machida, as you saw in the Anders fight, he's not as quick or explosive as he used to be. His style still creates issues because he's a counter guy by nature, so that's always going to allow him to get certain opportunities and to be defensively sound. But he no longer has that explosiveness and that quickness. You can get to Machida, and Machida can't fight at a certain pace. He can fight in spots. He can't really fight at a certain pace for 3 rounds hard, or much less 5 rounds. So moving to Bellator, they're still good fighters, but there's not mostly world class fighters there. They got, like, in every division, they got 2 to 5 world class, really world class guys. So he's not going to be exposed to as many top end athletes or top end technical fighters. So the skills he does have physically and the durability he does have is less likely to be tested in the Bellator cage. So he's going to be able to extend his career, kind of like Chet Congo did, Ryan Bader did, and it makes sense because he's already beaten Bader, and Bader's got a light heavyweight championship. He's already beaten Mousasi. Mousasi's got a middleweight championship. So you see guys that you defeated going over and feasting. How do you not follow them when there's an opportunity to restart your career? And he's at the best position he's ever going to be as far as leverage at this age. At this age, he has 2 fight win streaks, 2 impressive wins. He's never going to have more leverage at this age and time in his career.
I can definitely agree with you. I can definitely agree
I'm
with
just kind of
that.
curious. He's got a lot of versatility. He could fight a Bellator heavyweight if you pick the right heavyweight, and we already know he can fight a middleweight, and he can fight light heavyweight. So there's a lot of options you have with him. He's a very versatile fighter weight wise, and that's kind of a good thing right now. And since he's coming off of wins, if one of the Bellator guys beats him, it still looks good because he came off of 2 straight UFC wins, two fairly impressive UFC wins, high profile wins. So it's a win-win for everybody involved. He's going to get paid, and Bellator is going to get a little shine for having Lyoto in their cage or whatever they call it over there.
Yeah, there's definitely always going to be some shine there. Um, would you want to see him fight Fedor?
It'd be interesting. I mean, Vader's not a really big heavyweight, so they could do like a catch weight, and it'll be interesting seeing Fedor against a guy who's probably a little bit quicker than him and has kind of a unique stand-up style. Like, I'd be interested in seeing it. Do you know? I would be interested in seeing the fight. I'm not saying it'd be one of the best fights you'd see, but stylistically, it'd be very interesting to see how that fight goes. And they could definitely sell it. I mean, I know it'd be 2 older guys, but a lot of fans would turn in to see Fedor versus Machida. That'd be a fight you could sell easily, I think.
I definitely think it's a fight you could sell for sure. Let's look at what Bellator did in reference to their announcement with Danzen, however you want to
I
pronounce
heard
it.
it's presented. Is it DAZN? Is somebody told me that's how it's presented? You
I've
say
heard
it?
the Zone, I've heard Dazen, I've heard so many different other naming conventions that is just like just said like just leave it at Dazen or whatever the hell it is. Let's just leave it at that. Um, but Bellator announced a deal with them, and he is, excuse me, that organization is now moving into the streaming space. And what they're doing is they're taking away their tape delay shows and now putting them on a platform where you can pay the streaming costs to catch the content. You can catch the pre-taped events will now be live, and then they also will have exclusive content up there as well too. So, like, for example, their September 29th card, which features Silva versus Rampage 4, Musasi McDonald, and some of the preliminary bouts for the welterweight Grand Prix. That's going to be behind that paywall. So I think this is an interesting idea. You see more of MMA going behind this paywall. You see more of combat sports going behind a paywall in general because of the shift in consumption and the shift in television watching as a whole. So that's definitely one thing that is worth consideration in this conversation. But they haven't announced how much the platform will cost. They haven't announced what the totality of the deal yet. But just from a preliminary standpoint, what are your thoughts about Bellator entering the streaming industry?
I mean, it's good for them because they're probably it's kind of similar to the ESPN thing in that they're getting guaranteed money, which means now you can approach your matchmaking a little bit differently. You can approach who you bring into the organization and what you do with the organization a little bit differently because now you have guaranteed money coming in. So you can make certain matchups. You can put certain plans into play that might not pay off right away. That'll pay off a month from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, because you have a steady stream of money coming in as a result of that deal. So that should offer them a lot of freedom and hopefully give them some more space to flesh out their divisions by bringing in a higher quality of person, even if they're not name guys, quality guys. Because me and you have talked repeatedly about how thin their divisions are. So that should help that. As far as being behind a paywall, I mean, it's a sports profession, and a lot of fans hate how wild, wild west mixed martial arts is, and people not getting paid and things not being set up. But when you become more professional, things like this happen, which means there's going to be a higher cost to the casual fan and to the hardcore fan. You're not just going to get a bunch of free good cards anymore. You're going to have to pay for the good cards. Everybody keeps saying they don't like those Bellator sideshow cards. Okay, they're going to give you quality cards. You're just going to have to pay before you can see them. So we're going to see how dedicated these people are to the high quality top matchup fights they've been asking for, because you used to get some of those for free and now you have to pay almost all the time for them. So we're going to see how invested fans are in pushing the sport forward and making it legitimate, because if they don't hit certain numbers, it's going to tell you that the audience isn't there, and the audience it does have aren't invested enough for it to make a, how do you call it, a financial to be financially rewarding.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting because it someone described MMA as the sport that's probably most expensive for people to be a fan of, because you don't get content on free television.
Nope, not at all. Everything's cable or stream or something, or their personal fight pass or their website. Everything requires you to make a financial investment, and it's just getting even. It's going to be even more of a financial investment. So it's very interesting to see how the ratings turn out for this, because really all Dazen's doing is they want content. It's the same thing Fox did. They want content. Bellator is the second biggest name in mixed martial arts right now, and it provides them a leg up over other streaming services that just do boxing, because Dazen has boxing. Now they have mixed martial arts. So it's kind of like what ESPN is doing, how ESPN has that edge. They have boxing and they have mixed martial arts. Dazen's the only other streaming service that is offering both at a high level. So they're hoping that that's going to generate interest, generate subscription, and it'll enable them to have enough content to appeal to both sides. And if you can get MMA guys to get into the boxing, or boxing guys to get into MMA, you've essentially helped both sides, and you doubled your subscriptions. And that's what their hopes. That's what their hope is for. But in the short term, it's probably going to hurt a lot of fans. And the funniest thing to me is how everybody complains about the Bellator cards. Oh, these are sideshow cards, but they were free, and now everybody's complaining about how much money it's going to cost to watch Bellator now. And I'm like, y'all had it free for so long, y'all took that for granted. True. Now here we are.
It definitely had it free for so long, and that's no longer that's no longer the case. So it'd be interesting to see how this impacts the sport across the board. Somebody else brought up a good question too, of whether or not this money will be going back to the fighters. Again, we don't know. I saw somewhere like this was supposed to be like a pretty big deal for the organization, but we haven't heard how much it's worth yet. So I'll be interested in seeing just how much money goes back to these fighters, because Scott Coker did say that this money could be used, or will be used, to begin looking at some additional free agents in the future.
Well, all I can say is the same thing I always say when it comes to money for these fighters. I understand you want to be on the big show. I understand you want to fight the name guys, but you forget this isn't yet your dream, yet your passion. But if this is what you do and this is how you're trying to make a living, it's a job now. Whoever will pay you the most and give you the most return on your investment of time and physical damage is the person you need to go with. I don't care if it's RFA. I don't care if it's overseas. I don't care if it's ABC. I don't care if it's M1. Whoever will pay you, because you can't feed your family off of memories, and you can't make sure your wife and your family, your parents are safe off of good times. You need to go get paid and stop doing these million and billionaires favors so you can dance on their stage. This is a business, and this is a very short career. This ain't like being an accountant. You can be an accountant your entire life. You can't be a top level fighter. Most of the time, it's on average probably like 4 to 5 years max. So these guys can't afford to be doing favors and helping them out. Help yourself out. Help your family out, and go where they pay you the most money, regardless of what platform it's on.
Definitely go and make some money. So my fault. I'm moving forward. Let's keep on going there because did you watch Tough? Not Tough this week, but the Dana White Contender Series. I don't want to harp too much on that. The only thing I want to kind of touch on is the fact that Valentina Shevchenko's sister was able to earn a contract. What do you know about her?
I mean, she's
And
a
I'm gonna
world class
say
striker.
I'm gonna ask you because no one covers women mixed martial arts quite like you do. So what do you know about Shevchenko's older sister?
Well, a lot of people forget she took a break. She fought earlier in her career. She took like a 2 or 3 year break, if I remember, and went back to focusing on kickboxing. She's once again like a legitimately world class striker, and she's got some decent grappling skills. She's still developing her all round awareness as grappling. She's not as good as Valentina at this stage, but she's a world class athlete. She's a world class striker, and she's got 10, 15 years of competing in combat sports at a world class level. So I think she's a definitely good addition to the UFC. I knew she was going to get in because she's a name person. She has a name. Even though Shevchenko isn't big in the UFC, Shevchenko is a name and has some weight. She has that name. She's a sister of her, and she's got some credentials. And it's as much as the divisions have grown for the women, they're still, for the most part, very thin. They don't have a lot of people who are legitimate contenders, not like 155 at men's or 145 at men's or 170 at men's, where you have 10, 12 guys who can compete for the title in a given time. None of those divisions are as deep. So they're looking for bodies to fill and bodies who have, like you said before, a little bit of appeal, charisma, a look, and at least enough legitimate skills where you can market them as threats to the potential champion. So I thought her being in was a guarantee, whether it was an exciting fight or dominating fight or back and forth fight or a boring fight. I was almost 100% sure no matter how it went, as long as she won, she was getting in the UFC. That was already set up, in my opinion. The one thing that actually stood out to me the most was I didn't know I can't remember the heavyweight fighter's name, but the heavyweight fighter who won his fight and then got sent to tough. That really was really shocking to me.
Yeah, I can't think of the name. I can't think of the name either.
But you come on the show and they say, well, this guy won, but he was boring. This guy won, but it was too close. This guy won, but he needs work. This guy came out, put on a dominant performance, put a stamp on the performance as a heavyweight, a division that is thin on fighters, and they sent him to the tough house as a reward. Yikes! That's what tells me that if you don't have a name or you don't have some kind of fan base, they're not trying to go off performance. It's how much appeal do you have? How many fans do you have? What kind of news cycle would this make if we put you in? Greg Hardy had a win, and Greg Hardy was talked about being moved into the UFC. This guy had an equally impressive knockout, and you're sending him to the tough house. How does that make any sense?
Definitely. How does that make any sense there? And it's
There's no consistency. There's no
there's no
consistency in how they
consistency.
pick people.
There's no consistency at all. It would be interesting to see what if that ever kind of comes out. What is the rhyme and reason behind that? There isn't any consistency at all. And we go back to the guy who retired after his fight a couple weeks back. I really hope that guy kind of turns around, and I really hope that someone and I really
Yeah,
hope that
I understand how people. I understand why people do it because even if you don't get a contract, you got a high profile win on a very popular show, which in theory should give you some weight when you're fighting on smaller shows. But the point of it is to get a contract in the UFC, and I could see people maybe backing off of it a little bit because there seems to be no clear path to getting on there unless you have some kind of name or media energy behind you. Because I've seen guys be exciting, I've seen guys dominate, I've seen guys show all the skills, win fights, and not and not get picked. And then I see other people who may have been impressive, but no more impressive than somebody else, and they're in the show, they're in the UFC, but they happen to know somebody, they happen to have a name behind them, they happen to have some media energy behind them, they're related to somebody in the UFC, and it's hard to overlook these sort of facts when you're thinking about whether you should put yourself at risk to be on the show. Yeah, in the short term, it might get you some short money, but you don't know win or lose what's going to happen to you. And it's just a risky proposition to me. And the reason I said last week I don't like the show is because there's no consistency in how they pick people. First is you need to be exciting. This second is you need some work. Third, you weren't dominant enough. Fourth, you were boring. And then you see somebody with a name or with some kind of connection get in regardless of how their performance goes, as long as they win. And that's frustrating to me as a person who watches the show and gets invested in these fighters, to see people put on the performances necessary to win and get in the UFC and then be pushed aside or told come back later. This is combat sports. You don't have many years to come back later.
Yeah, you definitely don't. Let's move along and let's kind of look at some other things that are going on in the sport this week. I have to kind of pull up a site to
I
look
want to give a shout out to Joe Del Guide and Jessica I. She pulled off her second win at flyweight over this weekend, and it worked out perfectly because I wrote an article saying why Jessica Rose Clark should not take that fight, and pretty much everything I laid out was exactly why she lost that fight. And she was at that point ranked number 8 in the UFC and could have demanded a bigger name fight, and she took the fight with Jessica I, and now it's back to the back of the line, trying to get some momentum and hopefully get in title contention in the next year and a half as a result.
So yeah, I definitely saw you tweet that out.
Yeah, I still talk to Joe pretty often about it, and I've been pretty hard on Jessica I pretty much never gotten a fight been in wrong, and usually I picked against her. But the biggest issue has been, in my opinion, a mental issue. But at bantamweight, she was too small. She had no margin for error. Those girls were too big. Her power didn't transfer. Her physical strength didn't transfer. Any mistake she made on the feet or on the ground had huge consequences. At flyweight, those consequences don't exist. She's used to getting punched by the hardest punches at bantamweight. These girls can't really hurt her. They can't control her. They can't really take her down. They can't really strike with her. This is a really good chance for her to be a truly elite fighter and potentially a title contender at this rate, as long as she stays together mentally and stays focused. And I think Joe being in her corner helped out a lot. As long as she does that, she's going to be very hard to beat just from a physical perspective. She has advantages over almost everybody else ranked in the top 10 of the division right now. So this is a very good move for her. This is a very big win, and I really think she's turning the corner in the division she should have been in for the past couple of years. And I've been saying this for like 4 or 5 years. I said she never should have been in bantamweight. She should have waited till the UFC had a weight class that she fit in, because she was going to lose and lose badly. And I'm glad they finally have a weight class and she can show what she can really do. But as I said, it was very impressive. I'm a Jessica Rose Clark fan. I've seen the improvements she's had, but the reason I thought she was going to lose was a lot of her wins had been based on her facing underskilled fighters. Paige Van Zant, not a very technical fighter. Beck Rawlings, not a very technical fighter. Two fighters who weigh heavily with their athleticism and physical skills. And Rose Clark was too big and too durable for them to make their physical skills effective in a fight. She was too strong for Paige's her explosiveness to really be a factor. She could control her and rough her up. And Beck Rawlings always gotten by on being physically stronger and being able to back people up with her power. Against a bigger, stronger fighter, she wasn't able to do that. It came down to skills, and neither fighter had the skills or the seasoning to hold their own with her on the ground or in stand-up exchanges. Jessica I never had any of those technical shortcomings. She was strong enough. She was big enough. She was a better athlete. She was the better striker, in my opinion. And if nothing else, she was at least as good, if not better, on the ground. It was just a really bad matchup for Rose Clark, one that I didn't think stylistically or physically she had the tools to win. It was just a matter of whether Jessica I was going to keep it together from round 1 to round 3. Because there's always going to be a spot in the fight where you get hit, you get clipped, that person has a few moments of success, and usually in those moments, when the fight goes bad, it keeps on going bad for Jessica I. But at this weight, where she has some margin for error, where she gets taken down, she has a physical strength where she can get back up, where she can fight off a takedown, or she has the power that if somebody starts putting shots together, she can land 1 or 2 shots that can back them off. That gives her a little bit of breathing room, and that breathing room allows her to maintain her poise, maintain her focus, and to execute from beginning to end. And that's what I feel has been the biggest difference in her performance. She knows that she has some room to err. Before she knew, I get dropped, I can't come back from this. These girls hit too hard. I don't hit hard enough to get back in the fight. I get taken down. These girls are too physically strong. I'm not strong enough to get back up when these girls take me down and start controlling me. At this weight, she knows she can get back up. She knows she can get on top. She knows she can submit them. She knows she can hurt them on the feet. She knows she can take whatever they have to offer on the feet. And that freedom allows her to perform at the fullness of her abilities. Knowing that you can't handle someone's power, someone's athleticism, or someone's size instantly makes you gun shy because you know the first mistake you make could very well cost you the entirety of the fight. So as I told her trainer, now that she has that breathing room. Now that she has that faith that she can get control back. Now that she knows that she can hang in these tougher spots. Her mindset's clearer. She's more focused. She's executing, and she doesn't have as much pressure because she knows she can make a mistake and still win.
Schwan, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I just been talking about Jessica I.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me see something. I had a slight technical issue there. Okay, what about now?
I got you.
Okay, so.
Yeah, I just was filling up space talking, breaking down the Jessica Rose Clark fight, explaining why she won it and what the differences were for her in bantamweight to her to move to flyweight and why that's made her a better fighter mentally and technically.
You there?
You were saying, sir? Hello? Yeah, I guess Raphael's having a technical issue, but since he's having a technical issue, we'll just go on to the Leon Edwards Donald Cerrone fight. I was wrong on that one. I really thought Cerrone was going to be able to walk Edwards down. The biggest issue I'm having with Cerrone now is he was never the most durable fighter, and I've said that many times over his career, and it seems like he's lost the durability he's had. He can still take shots and work through them, but he can't. It seems like every shot hurts him before now. Shots used to back him up, shots used to scare him off, but now it seems like every shot he gets hit with is capable of putting him out or doing at least enough damage to put him in a position to be put out. And at the weight class he's fighting at, that's not acceptable. I believe for him to be effective, he might have to move back to lightweight. And even now, I don't think his speed and athleticism is good enough to compete at lightweight long term. But he's got some tough decisions to make ahead of him because if his chin isn't gone, his style kind of guarantees a certain level of contact. And if he can't take damage anymore, he's not a big enough hitter to put people away with one or two shots. He needs volume, he needs time, he needs space. And if he can't do those things, he's not going to be able to be successful in a world-class level.
Hey, can you hear me there, Schwan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was having technical issues. I'm not quite sure what you were talking about.
I just broke down Donald Cerrone and Leon Edwards right after I got done talking about Jessica I and Jessica Rose Clark.
Okay, good stuff. Good stuff.
We're veterans here. We fill space. When something goes wrong, we just fill the space. We're veterans here.
I totally blanked on that fight card this weekend, and I was worried because as I watched the fight, I'm like, yo, they're gonna give this fight to Donald Cerrone. I was picking on Dan Hardy because he was definitely being the biggest homer he could possibly be in talking about the fight because he was overly excited for every little thing that Donald was doing, but I thought Leon was doing more in key components. Thankfully, the judges did as well, and we didn't end up with a controversial decision. But what would you do next with Leon Edwards?
I know he called out Jorge Masvidal. I don't know if that win. I mean, it's a good fight. It's a name fight. I don't know that win actually moves him further up the chain. The biggest problem for him is I don't think as I said last week, I don't think he matches up very well with any of the guys who are considered elite in the division, and I don't think he's got a big enough Q rating to demand any of the guys who are elite in the division. I would say the best fight for him right now would be Masvidal, or maybe I don't know if he's fought Neil Magny yet, but if he hasn't, Neil Magny would be a winnable fight. Those two would be good fights, and to see if he's really the goods, or his win was more of a matter of Donald Cerrone's deterioration more so than Leon Edwards' development as a fighter. Because at this stage of Donald Cerrone's game, he's not getting leaps and bounds better. In fact, he's taking little steps backwards physically and to a certain degree technically. So that win might be more of Donald Cerrone, tells us more about Donald Cerrone than it tells us about Leon Edwards at this stage. And once again, Donald Cerrone's not a true welterweight. So that plays a factor in it as well. I like to see him against another younger, fresher guy to see if the improvements we saw Saturday hold, or Saturday, Sunday, I forgot, hold up against another guy who's a little bit fresher and has a little bit more in the tank physically.
True. Who would you put him up against next?
Masvidal or Magny, I think, would be the best option. I mean, I guess if Stephen Thompson is looking for a comeback fight, that'd be a good option too, a bigger name option. And Stephen Thompson needs to put some wins together so he can stay in the title mix. But yeah, at the high end, Stephen Thompson. At the low or medium end, I'd say Magny or Masvidal.
Okay, all right there. So, something else I wanted to cover on this weekend show was Bellator's main event on Saturday, where we have Limale McFarlane fighting against Alejandra. What's her last name?
Laura, if I recall correctly,
Yes,
Alejandra
Alejandra
Laura.
Dora for the organization's flyweight title. If you've been following Bellator's MMA, Bellator's Instagram and their social media channels over the past week, they've really been hyping McFarlane up. She's 7-0, coming in as a 7-1 fighter. What do you think about this bout there? I'm very familiar with McFarlane because her exposure in competitive grappling, mainly EBI. But do you think she's someone that such a big brand could be built around?
Yeah, as a person who focuses a lot on women's mixed martial arts in the flyweight division, UFC included, I'd say she might be at worst top five, maybe top three. I really think that there's maybe three or four girls in the UFC who I think have the skill set and the physical tools to compete with her. Jessica I probably, Valentina Shevchenko, of course. Roxanne Modafferi doesn't have the athleticism, but she has the experience and the all-around skill set and strategy. Sajar Eubanks has the athleticism. I don't know that she has the skills. But Nico Montano, I think, has a good balance of youth and skills and athleticism. But outside of those three or four girls, I think she'd essentially run roughshod over the rest of the UFC flyweight division. To be honest, in my honest opinion, she's that good. She's one of the better, if not best, grapplers in the world, and her improvements on the feet have just been amazing. You don't usually have a striker, a grappler of her caliber be this comfortable. And you see certain grapplers who come in, world class grapplers, you see them strike, and you're like, oh yeah, they're real nice, they're very good, but they haven't been taking a lot of damage. She's been in fights with girls who have legitimate stand up chops, and girls who are willing to get in exchanges, and girls who are big, strong, and physical. And she's shown that she has not just the skills to attack them, but she has the mentality and the durability to fight back. Teddy Atlas, famous boxing coach, always says everybody can fight, whether it's in the cage, in the ring, or the street. Everybody can fight. The question I always ask is, can you fight back? And when someone's pushed McFarlane, whether it's trying to rough her up on the ground or overwhelm her on the feet, she has always had not just a technical answer, but a mental answer of, I'm going to fire back and take control of this fight physically. Her work in the clinch is very amazing. And for a woman who doesn't look particularly big or physically intimidating, she's a very punishing fighter in the clinches and on the ground. She will choke the life out of you, and if she can't choke the life out of you, she will beat the life out of you on the ground. And it's very impressive considering how she is as a person, how she carries herself, that she has such a savage and punishing style. She has a real mean streak when she gets in there. And every fighter says that, but she actually has one.
Her grappling styles are a lot like that too. If you watched her back in EBI, she was she's very physically imposing on her
Yeah,
opponents, and you really saw that in all of her grappling matches.
yeah, she doesn't just, and I'm not nearly the grappling expert that you are, but I watch her and she doesn't, like some people you see, they out athlete you or they out slick you. They're just so tricky and awkward. She literally handles people. She puts them down, controls them, works them over. Does it in a technical manner, but she physically dominates you while she's technically dominating you. It's amazing to watch. It is, and it doesn't change when you add punches. She is, if not as savage, she is more savage once you involve strikes in it, whether she's taking them or giving them. I really think she could be a breakout star for them. And I think she's the kind of person where they'll start asking questions like, well, how would the UFC champion hold up against McFarlane? This might be an issue where Bellator really has the better class of champion in their division, which isn't the case in all their other weight classes.
Well, you could say that about welterweight.
Yeah, yeah, you could say that's true. That is true. That's the one of the ways you could definitely say that about. You can't say about middleweight. I definitely can't say about lightweight though. Light heavyweight either.
Nah, true, very true. But you can definitely say that about welterweight. That's one space where they can say, "Hey, We have the top champion middleweight. Middleweight could be up in the air too. It could be
Could
closer
be.
than some people think.
Yeah, but
Are there
in
some?
that but in that case, she has a good pack. She's attractive. She's very friendly and I've only talked to her a little bit online. She's very friendly and polite and respectful. She can fight. She has that mean streak, and she's high level skill. It's not like the physicality overwhelms the technique. She has world class technique and world class durability and physicality.
Yeah, and that's definitely
Oh, go ahead.
because it's like she's definitely someone I would love to bring on to the show to talk to.
She's willing to do. You just have to go through some red tape. I've talked to her. It's just there's some red tape you got to go through, unfortunately.
Dog, I hate red tape. Like you know me, I can't stand that bullshit. But we'll figure it out to see if we can get her
Yeah,
on
but
the
before I
show.
get back on this, I have to say this because I know some fighters listen to the show, some managers listen to the show. There's very few shows that actually give attention to Bellator female fighters, write articles on them, do analysis, talk about them in extended periods, or any female fighter who's not a huge name fighter, UFC, Bellator, anywhere. Like I routinely write about them. I have like 40, 50, 60 articles breaking down women fights, women fighters, giving them a lot of attention, a lot of shine. We talk about it on the show all the time. So if anybody's listening, y'all could really do us a favor and assist in getting some people who are interested in your fighter and telling your fighter's story and talking your fighter's fights on their show. There's a lot of people who give y'all lip service, but we're interested in actually sharing that story and getting y'all out there and giving you the attention, the respect you need. If you don't believe me, look at the articles I write. Listen to the shows we've had. We're always talking about this stuff. I'm giving it tons of time on our show, and a lot of other shows ain't doing that. A lot of other shows skip over those women fights, female fights.
Definitely on that. So, is there anything else from this Bellator card that stands out to you that you would want to kind of address?
I actually did an article because I mentioned it last week. I did two articles, one for Combat Press and one for MMA ratings. One article for Combat Press was talking about the 7 things that Christina Williams needs to do to beat Valerie Letourneau. And for MMA ratings, I did a do's and don't edition for what Valerie Letourneau needs to do and what she doesn't need to do to beat Christina Williams. The reason I'm focused on that fight is I believe that whoever wins this fight is going to be the next challenger for the title. It'd be interesting if it's Christina Williams because she's only had after this fight she'll have 3 fights in Bellator, and she wasn't supposed to win any of those fights. She wasn't supposed to beat Emily Ducote. Ducote was a second-ranked girl in the division who had just lost to McFarland. She wasn't supposed to beat her. She wasn't supposed to beat Heather Hardy. They brought her in to lose to Heather Hardy, and she had 2 back-to-back high-profile wins over high-profile fighters. And now she's fighting Valerie Letourneau, who challenged for the UFC strawweight title before. So she's getting another high-profile fight. And if she wins this one, they won't have anybody else to put in with her other than having her face McFarland, because McFarland will be the champion, and she's would have beaten the biggest star in the division, which would have been Hardy, beaten the second best fighter in division, and beat the most experienced fighter in division, all in less than a year and a half. So she would be the next title challenger automatically if she wins. Valerie Letourneau was a big signing. Everybody made a big deal when they brought Letourneau over because Letourneau had gone on such a run to the UFC. If she beats Williams, who's on a 2-fight winning streak and on a high-profile 2-fight winning streak, and being a big signing, she will be the next challenger. So whoever wins this fight will be challenging for the title next. There's a reason they put this fight right underneath the McFarland-Lara fight. And that's what makes it one of the most important fights in women's flyweight divisions, because while the UFC's division's been held up because Montano's been injured and recovering, Bellator's division has been moving on. McFarland will already have a defense before the UFC champion has the defense. And by the time that event's over, she'll already know her next challenger for her second event if she wins the fight. But either way, as far as the title moving, Bellator has done a much better job keeping their flyweight division in order and keeping it moving in a direction as far as developing challengers, setting up the next challenger, setting up the next big fight in the division. They've done a much better job than the UFC has.
And it's interesting because I think that we will begin to see the women's divisions kind of flesh out outside of the UFC, because I mean we've talked about this. The UFC has I'd say an agenda, but an agenda behind who they promote, and they may not always be promoting the most qualified candidates to the top
Yeah, I
position.
mean, we talked about Shevchenko. Shevchenko's a world class striker. She's a world class fighter. at bantamweight. She hasn't done anything. She beat the easiest fight at flyweight. She beat a fighter who shouldn't even been in there. I don't care who anybody else is beating flyweight. Whoever else has a win at flyweight has a more legitimate win than Valentina Shevchenko, who is only getting an opportunity based on A, what she did in bantamweight, and B, because she's attractive and has a fan base. She hasn't really earned a title shot at flyweight. She hasn't. But the UFC is trying to get buys. They're trying to build fan bases. They're trying to appeal to a segment of the fans. So they're willing to bend the rules and have nonsensical matchups to get the belt in certain people's hands or get certain people in positions to fight for the titles. And I'm not blind. I see that. And Shevchenko's a good enough fighter to earn a spot in the flyweight division for a title, but she hasn't earned it. She beat a girl who was not UFC caliber, and now they're saying she should get a title shot. Based off of what? And I'm a Shevchenko fan, but based off of what?
Based off of what?
You know, and I hate to toot my own horn, but I pay a lot of attention to a lot of women's mixed martial arts. A lot of analysts, a lot of people on Twitter argue with me. A lot of people who host shows and do analyst work complain to me, and I'm like, dude, you haven't written 10 articles on women's fighting in the past 5 years. You can't tell me about what I know about who ranks where and who's a good fighter and who's not. You don't pay any attention to these people until certain names come up. So if I'm saying that she doesn't deserve a shot, I'm not UFC brass. I don't have any power. But I guarantee you, I know more than probably 95% of the combat sports analysts when it comes to women's mixed martial arts. So if I'm saying she hasn't proven anything, there's a better than average chance that I'm right, that she has more work to do. And I'm saying she has more work to do. And I say that totally acknowledging her skills and what she's accomplished at bantamweight. But she hasn't accomplished nothing at flyweight. So she needs to get a legitimate win before she even mentions challenging for a title.
Well, hopefully we see some of that stuff shake itself out, because
we will probably not.
Why you gotta just smash my hopes?
If Paige Van Zandt would have beat Jessica Rose Clark, she'd be challenging for the title right now.
You're right. You're definitely right about that. So let our listeners know, man. What else are you working on this week, and where can they find your work?
You can find my work. The people who gave me my original shot and got me into this writing and pulling my hair I have left out of my head. MMA ratings. I do the large majority of my work for them. Of course, I have the piece on Valerie Letourneau and Christina Williams, and you should read it. I'm not saying it just because I wrote it. I'm saying it because people who are coaches, people who are scouting fighters for potential fighters who are scouting these girls, they contact me and they say, hey, before you release this article, let me see the rough draft because I want to get a better idea of what my guy needs to do in case they have to fight this person moving forward. And after seeing the last couple you did for Esparza, Gedalia, and Grasso, you're onto something. So I just want to see what you have to say about it and see if we're on the right path. So I'm not just writing it from my opinion and what I think is better than average and what I think makes sense. I'm actually writing it to the point where coaches, trainers, and other fighters are like, well, let me get a copy of this. Let me see this so I can show it to them, and maybe we missed something. So you're getting top-notch analysis and breakdowns as it pertains to strategies, techniques, and adjustments that need to be made in fights. But I have that one. I have the one on Christina Williams on Combat Press, and I actually did an article on the Clarissa Shields based off the fight she had last Friday, which is my first boxing article I've done ever since I started writing.
No, that was a hell of a good fight. That's all I ever done. That was a hell of a good fight.
It was a really good fight. They didn't give her opponent any credit. She was doing some real work in there, and they just could not say Clarissa Shields' name enough. I'm like, the other girls landed punches, right?
Like, did she drop her in the first round?
She dropped her, and throughout the fight, she was landing some counter left hooks. She was going to her body all fight long. She's like, well, some reason Clarissa Shields' mouth is wide open. I don't know why she's tired. Well, the girl landed like 40 body punches. That's why she's tired, because she's getting hit. She having to work. It's like it was a good win for Shields. I give her full credit, but they did not give her opponent nearly enough credit for the work she did in that fight.
How old is Clarissa Shields?
She's young. She's like maybe 20, 21. She's real young. She's like 21, maybe 22. She can't be past 22. I don't know for sure, but I don't think she's past 22.
Has she ever talked about MMA? Because I remember I saw the video of her and Cyborg sparring. Has she ever talked about MMA in any shape or form?
I mean, she's talked about it, but I think the plan is if Chris Cyborg can come over and win and maybe win a big fight or win a fight or two and get a title by some chance, because women's boxing is thinner than women's mixed martial arts, that they could have a super fight between her and Chris Cyborg, because she sparred with her before and Chris Cyborg showed her some grappling before.
Interesting. What do you think that would look like?
In a boxing match, it'd be similar to the Floyd Mayweather Conor McGregor, except unlike Floyd, it'd be more exciting because Shields wants to fight. She's a world-class boxer who has world-class boxing skills, and she will put those secondary to getting in your face and putting a fist in your face. That's what she wants. She wants to beat you up and show you that she's running the show and you have no chance to beat her. So she's going to make a fight. It won't be, she's not giving up rounds. She doesn't care, but she wants the money, but she wants to prove a point. This is what I do. I'm the best at doing it. So she'll give Cyborg chances to win, but the gaps in their skill levels is quite noticeable. There's a video of them sparring, and you can see that Cyborg's educated and has some skills, but you notice the gap in the seasoning and the awareness and the layers of skill when they spar. You see that Cyborg has some, and she's great for MMA, but she's light years behind Shields as far as actual technique. But Shields will go to war with you, and that'll be what gives Cyborg her chance to win the fight.
Interesting there. Interesting. So I have not done anything for MMA. I cannot talk. I have not done anything for ratings this week. I've been kind of swamped with catching up on some other stuff. But I will be back covering them next week. I want to do a piece on Eileen Malay, seeing what she does on tomorrow to see how she comes out of that fight. Always, I'm covering professional wrestling, covering content all over the place. So be sure to catch what you can from all the other outlets that I work with. Real quick. I
look forward to seeing you. You do some good work, man. I really like the perspectives you take on things. It's not just analysts or big news. You're trying to look past the surface and ask some questions as far as the articles about the women, the male gay stuff. You take unique approaches to it. And a lot of guys like to just touch on things. You actually will have the conversation and continue the conversation at every opportunity you have to discuss it. You don't just touch on it and then, well, I mentioned it once. It's like, no, 2 weeks later, he's like, I want to know how these women feel about this guy being a part of the UFC now, when everybody else forgot about it.
I still want that conversation to be had. It's funny because I had a conversation with Rich Byrne today, who is the, I guess the president of Kasai Pro, one of the newer up and coming grappling organizations in the industry, and he has some good things to say about my work. Not to kind of toot my own horn, but it was interesting hearing that because you don't get to hear. I don't hear that a lot. I see all the foolish comments that go up on the pieces I put out there. I see how many times I get called out of my name or whatever. So it's someone say what
I saw your illegal immigrant comment. That was hilarious. Had me laughing at work.
Dude, it's the truth. It's the truth. I was actually talking about that today in the gym. It's 110% the truth. You can't tell me you train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but you hate illegal immigrants. You can't. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I know. I was looking to see how many replies. I'm like, look back an hour later. Not too many replies this one. It's weird.
Ain't nobody got anything to say.
They don't want to get caught on. They don't want to get a screenshot. That's what they don't want to have happen.
I was hoping somebody would say something.
Go to your academy, end up getting jumped.
That's what I was about to say. Like, I hope somebody would say something smart, but nobody stepped up to the plate.
After that lady got her career ruined by taking that water from that little girl, calling the cops on her, ain't nobody that stupid. Ain't nobody taking their chances.
Not at all. So let me real quick, man. Let me get your feedback on the Paul Felder versus Mike Perry fight. We didn't get to talk about this. This is something I wanted to bring up as well.
I really feel that Paul Felder is getting the screw stuck to him. To be honest, he's been a stand-up guy, and they're putting him in to me, it's a lose-lose situation. He could win this fight because he's the fresher fighter. He is a better technical fighter. He's a better technical striker. But the problem with Felder is Felder likes to fight. He likes to exchange. He will stay in the pocket to get an extra shot on you to prove a point. Mike Perry isn't the most technical fighter. He's had some injuries. He's slowed down a little bit. But Mike Perry is still a massive, savage puncher. He's bigger. He is stronger. He's more durable. I think he's a better athlete. And we've already seen what happens with guys who are strikers in light contact and what happens to them when they're fighting welterweights. Even when they outclass the welterweight in skill, that size difference, that power difference makes every fight difficult. Look at Cerrone versus Matt Brown. Cerrone's a much better striker and fighter than Matt Brown. How much punishment did he take in that fight? How much punishment did he take in that fight against Rick Story? That's my concern for Felder, that he's going to be with a fight and he might get he might have career-altering damage done depending on how that fight goes. And I have the same concern for Mike Perry because Mike Perry's been in so many wars. What if Felder catches him with some vicious knee? I mean, each guy could really lose their ranking in their division and have their career altered because they're fighting a very dangerous, heavily mean streak, striking-oriented fighter. It's a great fight for fans, but it's the kind of fight that could maybe take some of the elite talent and kind of have it beaten out of them in a fight like this. So it's a really risky fight for both guys. And Felder's doing it because he wants to fight. Same thing with Perry. He wants to fight. So the UFC is taking advantage of their wanting to be in a fight by making them take one of the more dangerous fights they could take at this stage of their careers. And I think it's kind of irresponsible and unfair of them.
Here's a question I have. Why did they pull Vic and put him in with Gaethje and not Paul Felder?
I have a question. Why did they take Alaquinta instead of putting Paul Felder in for the title against Khabib?
Well, that was supposedly because Paul Felder wasn't ranked high enough.
That is nonsense. That doesn't make any sense.
That's the reasoning that was given because the commission said that Paul Felder was not ranked high enough, which, I mean, the UFC could have said, hold on 1 second, made a phone call and changed the damn rankings because their rankings, but that's neither here nor there. That was the explanation that was provided. You
never go with the highest ranked fighter. You go with the person who will take the fight. They didn't even give him a chance. I don't want to hear that ranking nonsense. So he's been gypped out of 2 fights through no fault of his own. It's not his fault he doesn't have ranked opponents on his resume. They haven't given him those guys to fight. That's not his fault. So he missed out on a chance for the title. Now he missed out on a chance of fighting Gaethje. He's got to fight a welterweight, a very big, hard-hitting welterweight, on how many weeks' notice? Like it just seems like they're trying to. I know they like him, but you wouldn't be able to tell by the way they treat this dude.
And the thing
go ahead.
What cracks me up is that they give him a live mic every now and then with him doing commentary. I just want him to go off like pipe bomb, CM Punk style.
Yeah, I mean he might as well, because being a company man and having fan-friendly fights and being a respectable and presentable analyst, that's got him nothing. He's had 2 fights canceled, missed out on the title shot, missed out on the big high-profile fight with Justin Gaethje to now fight Mike Perry. Like, it's like somebody hates you in this organization, dude. I don't know what you did, but somebody hates you. And like I said, he can win the fight, but it's one of those fights where enough damage can be received or given on either side where either guy can lose some of their shine as a result. Like, neither one of these guys is afraid of contact. So you have a very high-level, busy, technical striker in Felder, and you have this unorthodox, highly athletic, punishing fighter in Perry. There's no way either one of these guys walks out of this fight the same, in my opinion. And, maybe one of these guys will blow the other guy out quickly, and there's no need for my concern. But if this fight ends up being a war, I guarantee you will see a decline in both fighters in the next 2 or 3 fights after that.
Definitely true. I definitely agree with you on that. And I don't think that this is a good look for Paulie.
I can't believe his management let him go through this. If I was his management, I'm like, you're not taking this fight, dude. I don't care. Whatever. You're not taking it. Wait for another lightweight.
Like, he has to be getting a ridiculous payday. Has to.
They bet. If they're not getting him a huge payday, his management should be fired. Because if I was his management, I'd be like, dude, you're not taking this fight. How much money are they going to pay us to take this fight? Well, they're going to pay my regular salary. You ain't taking it. Sorry, we ain't doing it. Not doing it. We'll go somewhere else. It's not worth it.
Exactly, it's not worth it. But, man, we're closing down. We're done. We'll be back next week. We will be back next week, and let's do the damn thing.
All right, sir. Pleasure as always.
No problem, man. Have a great weekend.
You too.